House rules are rules that are specific to your local game group, or maybe even certain scenarios that try to enhance the game, at least within your own area. And these are going to vary. They're entirely optional, as we said before. Today we're going to continue our series. We're going to talk about one of these house rules, a chance to kind of discuss it and come up with maybe some better tweaks to make the house rule even better. So let's go down to the classroom and talk about it.
Be afraid. Be very afraid.
Welcome to today's edition of Bolt Action Basic Training. Again, we're going to continue our series on house rules. And today we're going to talk about Tiger Fear, a much maligned rule for a lot of good reasons potentially. Let's talk about how you might, a couple ways to change it. I'm going to offer two suggestions here, but a little bit of background, because Tiger Fear was a real thing. However, it wasn't as widespread as the game would make you think. It was definitely a thing as far as the U.S. Army in France was concerned, but they had encountered it during their fighting in North Africa as well as Italy. And though it did weigh on them a little bit, it wasn't necessarily as terrifying as it was to the troops that landed in Normandy and fought in northwest France. Similarly, when you look at the Russians, even with the newly available source material from, now a lot of that material has, been exposed and been offered up to historians, especially, whether they're Russian or not. A lot of them, source material, the memoirs and things, they don't speak of the Russians actually dealing with this thing called Tiger Fear. And even before there was any of that material released, you could look at some of the anecdotes during some of the battles. During the time frame of the Battle of Kursk, for example, the Russians kind of knew how to deal with tigers. They really weren't put off by them, and matter of fact, they didn't really mistake the Panzer IV for the Tiger. And when they did encounter the Panzer IV and the Panzer V and the Tiger, Panzer VI, they had a completely different approach. They didn't kind of hesitate. They actually ran toward, for lack of a better term. Even their lighter tanks, the ones that had less of a chance of surviving, and old T-34s, they would open up the throttles and they would press in as fast as they could, because they knew that they could just get up, if they can get into the Tiger formation and get angles from the side at close range. Well, when I say close range, I'm not talking point blank, but within a few hundred yards from the side, or especially the rear, the Tigers were toast. So they didn't really fear them in the truest sense of the word. At least not in the way the Tiger Fear rule works. So let's talk about some options here. The first one is, and bear with me on this one, scrap the rule completely. If you think about it, a player, they know they're up against a Tiger or Tiger wannabe, if you will. They know about the 10 plus armor or 11 plus armor, or the sloped front being equivalent of 10 plus for the Panther. They know about the heavy anti-tank or super heavy anti-tank gun that's facing them. They know whether their armor can handle. They know whether infantry can get mauled by the HE shot. The opponent is already aware of the dangers, and they're already kind of going to play it a little differently, simply because they can't afford to lose their normally one tank to a Tiger. So they're going to play a little more cautiously when a Tiger's on the table. Whether they can, and of course, when the player's unit can see the Tiger, that's going to kind of dictate kind of what's he going to want to do. Does he want to fire instead of advancing and firing, or does he want to back it up or turn to get out of the line of sight? These are the things that are actually going to face the player's mind, and that actually is a manifestation of Tiger Fear. So just let the player handle the challenge, or if you will, the dilemma of having this super heavy tank heavy tank on the table. As if you think about it, there are no rules for the KV-1 having a Tiger Fear, but the Finns and the Germans faced the same problem that the Allies did when they faced a Tiger. They had to deal with this heavily armored beast that was pretty much heavily armored all the way around. How do you deal with that? Well, they had to come up with ways, and their tactics were influenced by the presence of a KV-1. So let's maybe let the table do the work for us. Let's not put in a special rule. The fact that it's there is already something. Now, the one disadvantage at treating it this way is you don't get that fear issue with the Panzer IV. And the later models of the Panzer IV were very often mistaken for the Tiger, especially by the U.S. soldiers. The Tiger was rarely encountered by the U.S. forces in France. They were more often encountered by the British and Poles, because British Canadians and Poles, because the Germans put most of their forces to oppose the British sectors, because that was the shortest distance between the Allies and Berlin. That freed up the U.S. to get a little bit more mobility, but they didn't have to face the heavy tank battalions which had the Tigers. Of course, the Panther and the Panzer IV was mistaken by the U.S., and you did have units kind of having some issues. Did they really panic? I don't know. So, first way to approach it is just get rid of the rule completely, and rely on the player to actually be the one who's experiencing the Tiger fear. Okay. That's my personal favorite way to deal with it. All right, now if you have to use, or sorry, if you really want to have a Tiger fear rule in the game, which is fine, let's do it a little different, actually a lot differently. Because the way it's written now, any unit that can see it, right now within 18 inches, has to take a test. And that actually, contradicts the realities of war. And it will go back to Kursk, for example. The closer the Russian tanks got to the Tigers, the more confident they were they're going to get there. So why would they take a test when they got close, when they were more vulnerable at long range? So it just intuitively doesn't make sense. So let's look at the possibility here. Instead of the current rule, we completely scrap it and add this. So Tiger fear will only affect regular and inexperienced units. It will not affect any veteran units. Okay? Now, what it will do, when the Tiger hits a unit with any of its weapons, it's going to do one additional pin. I think this has a good way of introducing the real fear element that the Tiger would provide. Or in the case of the Panzer IV, that, again, fear element of mistaking it for a Tiger. So think about this. Let's look at the main gun. Okay, you got a heavy anti-tank gun if it's the Panzer IV, and a super heavy anti-tank gun if it's pretty much anything else. It's going to hit. It's going to do one pin for the hit, an additional pin, that's two, for the Tiger fear rule, and then if it does something on the damage table on a 1, 2, or 3, it does a third pin, or it knocks it out on a 4, 5, or 6. So you're going to rattle that tank crew that actually gets hit. And I think that's very effective, because you just got hit with a tank round that could easily knock you out. Okay, and again, you're dealing with regular inexperience. So I think throwing three pins down, it's going to put some pressure on. But it's only the unit that actually gets hit by it. Not every unit that can be seen or see it, right? So I think that's a nicer approach. But let's look at infantry and artillery getting hit by either the main gun's HE round or machine guns. If you think about it, artillery are very unlikely to damage the Tiger at all. Even the heavy artillery with a +4 pen coming in from the top, basically it's +5. They're going to glance on a 5 if they hit. That's not all that great. I mean, chances are, right? It's there, but it's not. I mean, the chance that you're going to hit on a 6, right? Indirect fire. If you're shooting directly, you're likely going to go at the front. You're going to glance on a 6. Odds are bad. They're not in your favor. So when you look at the crew themselves, they know that they're facing some very dangerous opponents here, because their weapon is not as capable of taking out the Tiger as the Tiger is taking out them. If you look at the infantry squad, even with anti-tank grenades, the same thing can be said. A full squad of 10 men with anti-tank grenades at full health if it charges a tiger, so number one, you have to be within 12 inches. Number two, you have to have, you don't have reaction fire from the tiger to whittle you down. The tiger has to have not moved. You're going to get 4s to hit. That means you're going to land an average of 5. So now you have +5 pen. So you're going to glance on a 5, pen on a 6. That's pretty good. But again, if you fail, you're 1 inch away from the tiger, and it can unload on you. It's obviously a threat, a really dangerous thing. So you can simulate that additional stress from being hit by this super heavy tank, well, that we think of it as a super heavy tank, by adding that additional pin. So the machine gun will do 2 pins to an infantry or artillery unit. An HE round will do a D3 plus 1 pin. So you could do up to 4 pins with an HE round. I think that has that suppressive effect against the targeted unit, and it doesn't affect all the others. So it makes the Tiger Fear a little more real against inexperienced and regular troops, and kind of lets you have some of the effects of the Tiger being on the table. So let's kind of have a discussion. What do you guys do, aside from ignoring the rule, what do you guys do when it comes to Tiger Fear in your games? Let's discuss it below. What do you think of the 2 approaches I've suggested here? And again, let's have a conversation and, as a community, come up with potentially the best way to represent Tiger Fear, and maybe Warlord can actually write that into the next errata or the next version of the game. All right? So thanks for sticking around. Stay tuned for the next house rule video, and we'll see you next one. Bye-bye.